You're listening to Pods with Nick and James. I'm James. Say hi, Nick.
Hi, how you doing?
Um, okay, so today's subject is one which has less so now, but dominated the news in early 2022. It is one which some people have said is a long time coming. It's definitely a topic that, again, the moment I've touched upon this, I realise I could have split this into 7 or 8 different topics. But the topic we're going to be talking about today is the Russian-Ukraine war, which is still ongoing currently, has been going on now for 3 years. Just trying to look at it, try and figure out how has this happened, how is it still going on, what are some of the major points that have led to this. At another point, I'll probably try and do maybe logistics of how things have started and how they're going on. But for now, we're just going to stick with a loose overview. Um, Doing some research into this, I found that it's impossible not to come across as either opinionated or ignorant. So, to any of our listeners out there, I apologise for anything that I say that may offend, but just I've got opinions on this. But once again, this is one of those depressing topics which, like, um, yeah, like, to be fair, like so many of the topics that we've covered before, it's just turned out to be confusing and a little bit depressing. A little bit like the Palestine-Israeli episode that we did a good, was it a year back or like several months back at least?
Yeah, I
Um,
think I know what you're talking about, where you expect it to be quite clear cut and there to be a good reason behind why there's such conflict, and yet it's really vague and muddy water.
yeah, and everybody seems to say things from a different angle. Like it's almost like um, the two different narratives for the two different sides just don't seem to have any um, yeah, like any middle ground. My two main sources for this episode was two books. So you got the Russo-Ukrainian War um, by Cyril Polsky, um, published by Penguin Books, and then you've got How the West Brought War to Ukraine, understanding how US and NATO policies led to crisis, war, and the risk of nuclear catastrophe by Benjamin Ablow. Just for a couple of minutes here, uh, the second of those books um, uh, is it's well written and it's honest, and it has for me it has intellectual integrity in that when it makes assertions, it admits they are assertions. When it makes assumptions, it admits they are assumptions. But because of the amount that it does that, it's also I wasn't I I was partially convinced, but I wasn't fully convinced by that second book. Like there were too many what ifs, and there was too much using of certain analogies, like American foreign policy, how America reacts to other nations building up weapons and arms close to its border, compared to how Russia reacts to NATO building up arms on its border. And like they kept on using this ridiculous analogy of, well, what would happen if um, Russia started doing military exercises in Canada, and it was just like, oh well, the Canadians and the Americans might not always get on, but they share a language, and that's not the border I'd go for. I'd say use Mexico. But anyway,
No, I get
yeah,
it. I
it
found
was
a
it
lot of
was
the data sources as I was like looking through a lot of the research. You know how I tend to do research for these episodes. It's not really come from any one particular source. I go through so many different sources.
yeah, you do a lot wider anger and
And
quite
there's
a bit
some that I
deeper
come across where I'm like,
digging.
this feels really biased, really one-sided. I don't want
Yep.
that. I want yeah, an unbiased perspective. Like if it
Mm.
paints a, like that, if it paints a picture that it's leaning more one way or fair enough, as long as it's fact driven, and as long as it doesn't lean into like emotional reaction, get point justified. I'm okay with it. But most of the time, when I was looking
Oh,
through like the number of sources, close the page and move because of how emotionally.
I'm okay with emotive language as long as it's backed up.
Yeah, I
Don't
mean,
say I struggle with is when like people make an accusation and then don't necessarily use an example or act like it's self-evident,
yeah,
which I get people do in interpersonal arguments all the time. But if you're writing something in black and white about a socio-political conflict, you got to back up.
yeah,
You got to back it up, you know. But anyway,
yeah,
sorry, keep
exactly.
going.
No, I mean,
Apologies.
I was just exactly said like, um, the it's okay to be passionate about what you're saying, but when you're writing a a publicity on publication on in such a grand event, very careful because otherwise you can mean and it makes it feel like propaganda, and you may well be absolutely right in what you're saying, but the way that you're saying it makes it feel like propaganda, trying to make me.
Mm.
I mean, to be fair, I got the same from some of the Russian documents. They were very, I mean, Russian documents, God, they are really wrong on how wrong the world is. But if you look between the lines, you can what points they're trying to make. Some of the less bias. There is a bit more of a two. Yeah, centuries, if not a millennia or more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like all conflicts, it's not just this one instance.
No, exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, so I tell you what, let's talk a little bit about the history of the two nations. So Ukraine, um, Belarus, and Russia do have intertwining and shared history. Both Belarus and Ukraine have been part of multiple uh, Russian empires. Oh, as I use that term loosely, I am saying the USSR was an empire in and of itself, and there were the historical empires, and it's changed over the years. What I will say though is that although the Crimea may have had a high Russian population recently, looking back through history at the two nations, they're separate.
Yeah,
Like Ukraine has all Ukraine is a separate nation. Like Russia, before it was even named Russia by Peter the Great in like the late around just after the time of the American Revolution, like Russia and Ukraine like separate languages, separate similar, but separate languages, separate culture,
They were the
separate song.
Muscovites, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah, like this, but it's just okay. So yeah, like Ukraine is different from Russia. Like it's not like
It has its own history.
England.
It
Yeah,
like originally, if you go back far enough, like it was like started in like the behind started with the Kievan Rus, right?
yes, but even that, when the people from Moscoviv, sorry, was that the name of
They were
Russia had a
Muscovites
name
in
which
Muscovy.
Muscovites. When the Muscovites traveled back to Kiev, that's when they realized, oh shit, these people are different from us. And yet the narrative still stuck that the people were the same, and they're not.
Yeah,
And sorry, you go though. I'm
no,
talking
but
too much.
even the Belarus, you could say the same for the Belarus. Like there is
Yeah.
distinct um, historical stories for each of the nations. Was it was the Russian Empire that kind of actually that's a lie. Um, Started. It's kind of like Ukraine has gone through a number of different evolutions. It's been under Polish rule, it's been Ukrainian rule, and then predominantly been under Russian rule. Um, and like that has been an ongoing theme throughout history. Um, the Russian back and tried to rule. I think they
Absolutely.
feel that because of the Kievan Rus history share, um, they feel like their ancestral capital, Kiev, and they
Mm.
want it back. They want their, but it, as you said, the Muscovites were a separate entity. They came settled there alongside the Kiev and became part of the same thing. If I'm remembering rightly.
What I'm not certain. I'm afraid I did some research into this, but I'm not. All I know is that the ancestral homeland of I didn't realize that Kiev was this much of a historical, cultural, and political powerhouse and hub. I have to put my hands up and say, you know, I didn't know that. Um, but
Yeah, it was the Mongols that
it,
overrun it.
yeah. Also, again, it still surprises me just how far-reaching the Mongols were and how many of the Eastern European countries they've kind of like literally overran at different points throughout history.
Absolutely. I
It's
mean, they
absolutely
say
crazy.
they say Rome wasn't built in a day. Tell you what, the Mongolian Empire bloody was. It shot
Yeah.
up. It did literally cover so much of the globe so quickly in comparison. And considering they don't have modern technology, it was land horse, like land faring transports like carts, horse, foot work that they incredible. But anyway, we're digressing. Um,
Mm.
so the Russian Empire effectively reigned over you about 200 years from about the 18th. Then um, fell under brought under the fold of the Soviet Union, right? Was
Yeah.
at the end of the Russian Empire, the beginning of the SSR, right?
Yeah. But like again, it wasn't necessarily a smooth transition, and it's not one thing ended immediately and the next thing popped up. Like it's interesting that Ukraine has always been kind of separate, and it's always been Russia. I hate to say it, from the looks of things, like just treating Ukraine. Okay, so I'm going to make an analogy here, and I apologize to any listeners, and this is just my opinion, but the way that Russia treats Ukraine seems really, really similar to the way that England has traditionally treated um, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, with just every couple of 100 years, some kind of atrocity is committed by the larger, more centralized power against the other ones. And one thing that I was really surprised to learn is that even during the time of Stalin, like with the movement of resources when Ukraine was under the USSR, 4 million people, like Ukraine is a fertile land and at one point was the breadbasket of Europe, but during Stalin's early reign, 4 million Ukrainians were allowed to starve through the movement of resources as a way of bringing the Ukraines to heel, or to kind of stop the people from rising up. And it's just it's ridiculous, like just the way that neighboring countries seem to treat each other is just absolutely. Sorry, I know that's really basic, but it was just something that really surprised me, because this wasn't like way back in ancient times. This is literally in the 20th century, and I honestly didn't think. I know genocides happen, but I didn't realize starvation,
Yeah,
literal starvation, used
yeah. There
as
was a
a
name for it,
political
wasn't I? I
weapon.
can't remember.
Mm.
Now I feel like I'm. So what? Let's go over. So obviously there is a muddy past. But what about more recent? Look at that. Like, what is the reason the Ukrainian-Russian war actually started when it did?
Okay, so the recent conflicts have happened for a while, with the breakdown of the USSR in the late 80s and early 90s. It's interesting that the old president of the USSR, in their letters and in their writings, literally saw Ukraine as the latchkey to any kind of Russian empire. The way that they put it was that um, without Ukraine, Russia can't have an empire. With Ukraine, Russia immediately is an empire. So he kind of saw Ukraine as pivotal, and it's understandable considering out of all of the USSR states, Ukraine was always the second. You had Russia, kind of like this absolute, like the area of Russia is
Monstrous.
absolutely vast. I should have
Huge.
looked it up. Yeah, you look at a map and you go, oh, which bit's Russia, which bit's Asia? No, no, no. All the top of Asia
Yeah, that's
is Russia.
Russia. Yeah, yeah.
Like Russia
That,
might as well be. Yeah, if Russia was separated from all the other countries and was its own landmass, it would be considered a continent, not an island.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it stretches so far across the world on You know what? Even just looking at this world map now, yeah, it stretches halfway across the world.
Well, you used to be
Like
able to
one
go
side
from
of
Russia to America, didn't you? But on foot.
yeah,
It used to be an
yeah,
ice
that's it.
bridge. It used to connect between. That's how they made the oil pipelines between Russia and America.
It's crazy. But it's Russia is massive. Ukraine is still a large country geographically, but it's
Coming
just
from the UK, that's not a difficult thing.
yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That's true. We're tiny by comparison. But like Ukraine was always like a surprising close second when it came to productivity, when it came to um when looking at the things of like in the early 20th century, like it was always this is what's made in Russia, this is what's made in Ukraine, and it was always surprising just how close the Ukrainians were to keeping up with the Russians.
Yeah.
It was just yeah. So Ukraine seems to be like a an incredibly vibrant country.
And yet,
Um,
since the USSR broke down, Ukraine has not managed as well, has it?
no, no, that's absolutely true. So Ukraine, Ukraine. So unlike, here's another. You know what? I'm glad that although we've got some listeners, I'm glad that we don't have a huge listener base. So I'm not going to piss off too many people with this one. But it, unlike Brexit, Ukraine did unilaterally vote for its independence. You know, like it's interesting that the bits of Ukraine that are further away from Russia voted 80-90% for independence. The Crimea, which is the bit well, which is currently part of Russia, and had a Russian the highest contingent of Russian people within Ukraine, still voted 54% for
Independence, be
for
part of
independence
Ukraine.
to be part of Ukraine.
And yet,
So
Russia chose to, what's the word? Russia chose to, I can't remember the Crimean.
well, but I'll tell you what, we'll go through a quick timeline of events. US, so we won't go back to ancient history, but the two nations have we'll just say the two nations have a muddy past. The borders have moved. Russia has ruled over Ukraine at different times of history. Ukraine has never ruled over Russia, so it can't really be compared to France and England, where things have gone backwards and forwards massively. Um, but like, okay, so the breakdown of the USSR happens. Ukraine goes about its business and doesn't do so well financially, but it does at least have a democratically elected government for a time. From what I've read into Russian politics, is that after the breakdown of the USSR, they had a couple of people, but quite quickly, within by about 1993, an individual there's like coups in Russia, and one individual, I can't remember his exact name, but he basically, I hate to say it, does a Palpatine and literally, despite being held back by two different governing bodies, literally says, I'm going to give myself emergency powers. Gives himself emergency powers and then just stops listening.
Yep.
And the democratically parts of the Russian government can't get enough majority in order to impeach and get him out.
Well, the Euro Maiden
Which,
was it?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, that is it.
From Maidan, you
Yeah, no, that's it. That is it. Like it's.
Viktor
But okay, but
Yanukovych.
that's it. That's the bloke. Okay, so you got that happening in the 90s. A lot more, unfortunately, negative stuff happened with Croatia, and a lot of other Eastern countries. A lot of bad things happened there. We'll cover that in another episode at some point, if we get round to it. Things keep going. Now, things start to get hairy as more nations join NATO.
Yep.
Now, America, American foreign policy is somewhat contradictory in that they react very poorly to people building up weapons close to their borders, yet they expect other countries to be fine when they do it. If you go back to the time period I'm going to focus at now is the early 2000s,
Right. Yeah.
um, when Ukraine starts to show an interest in joining NATO, and America keeps on running large scale um, large scale military exercises in NATO countries, and specifically they start setting up um, missile systems, surface to surface missiles with hundreds of miles of range, not hundreds of miles from the Russian border,
Yeah.
which in and of itself, like I don't blame Russia for their initial response of saying this is not okay. There was a famous paper or a famous um, exchange where the Russian, I think, foreign minister literally said "niet" means "niet,"
Yep.
which is literally "no" means no.
Yep.
Like
I mean, with all due
they just
respect, if somebody is waving a gun at you, you're going to be ducking down out of the way, holding your hand up, going, "Oh no, stop, stop." Even if they
yeah
say
no
to you, "No, it's not loaded, mate. Not loaded."
yeah
You're like,
no that's it. That's it. But it's also like it's the capabilities. Like, why put missile systems which can, and this is the annoying
mhm,
thing, the the tactical flexibility of these systems, I understand. I understand why a military commander would want these missile systems which can have thermonuclear missiles in them.
yeah,
But you don't put those on your border, you know?
yeah.
You don't. Yeah, like that's.
Well, when Russia did it in Cuba,
Oh yeah,
what did America do?
freaks the fuck out. Sorry, I
So,
think is the technical term.
but it's pot kettle black in it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just it's ridiculous. I completely understand. But what I love is that Russia went to the United Nations with, and again, this is so bad that I'm sorry that I've only heard this and not written it down properly. So, but I I'm not going to pretend that I'm a massive fan of Putin. Like he is taking his country into war, but in 2007 he brought something to the UN's and to the European Union's attention, and he tried to get everybody to sign a missile accord
Yep,
saying that, okay, look, we're not none of us, nobody is going to um, put nuclear missile facilities next to each other's borders. And even if the um, even if the phrasing in it was unfair, even if the demands of it were ridiculous, he still went peaceably to the world stage and
yep,
tried to do things legally slash get an accord going so that people weren't putting nuclear weapons or missile systems which can easily contain nuclear weapons on the border of his country. I think that was reasonable. That's where the reasonableness stops by the end. But the very fact that he did that, I can't say I can't fault that, you
Yeah.
know? And then later, when people are accusing him of coming up with a false narrative, elements of the narrative spoken are false, but there is I completely understand why he would possibly feel, or why the Russian people could quite easily feel threatened by the North Atlantic task force beginning to put assault weapons on their border and then claiming it's self-defense. Likewise, though, I also can understand why NATO is a little bit scared, because another source of mine is a podcast called Trigonometry,
Yeah.
and they talk a little bit about um, Russia's Russia's military potential. Russia is making more shells than the whole of Europe, or sorry, the whole of NATO and America combined, which is terrifying. And they are upping their production all the time. So again, it's frustrating that we've got this standoff of two powers which are upping their military capacity, one through the placement of weapons of possible weapons of mass destruction, and another through the mass production of weapons on the ground.
Yeah.
And
Didn't
it's annoying.
didn't
Hmm?
Russia suggest uh, a joint like missile base in Azerbaijan as a compromise for the US um, building these missile bases in Europe? They basically said, "Look, we don't like it, but if like, we understand that you need them for the like rogue states that you're coming up against, um, but if you feel that way, rather than do it on your own, right on our doorstep, why don't we do it over there and we'll do it?"
I mean, if that's the case, that would have been a better
And then
way
it
of
was
doing
rejected by
things.
the US. That it wasn't in a good enough position to be beneficial.
Mm, I mean, that does just sound like a cop out, doesn't it? But
Yeah,
again, I haven't seen the military report, so I wouldn't know. But if I don't know if the world's two largest powers are America and Russia,
I know.
and assuming, yeah, well, it would be China now, yeah, but assuming that if that's the case, if you're frustrating the world's other superpower and they come up with a compromise, although it's not the military way of doing things, the diplomatic way would be to shake their hand off.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know. It just all right, but sorry. Anyway, after 2007, um, Russia continues to get frustrated. Uh, America apparently backs a number of coups in Ukraine, and a pro-Russian democratic government is overthrown by a ultra-nationalistic government. Um, I don't know the exact parties, I don't know the exact details, but I know that happened, that there was a pro-Russian government, and and it has been replaced through revolution. How much the US has actually been involved with that, I don't know. But it's the
sounds like
governments. There's the
political assassination. It's a technique. I called something like that. technique where the American government essentially uh, depose a leader and then appoint one of their own, should we say, for lack of a better term,
Yeah, or somebody who it's not even
is
necessarily their own.
pro
It's just
is pro
whoever,
America.
yeah, pro America or whoever, whatever fits their needs at the time.
Yeah,
And sometimes that backfires horribly on them. But like we'll go into those at another point. Um, so you've then got this very anti Russian government on Russia's border. Unsurprisingly, the Russians get more frustrated by this, and eventually they do um, they do literally annex Crimea in 2014,
yeah,
and that causes a huge amount of, well, it's still an invasion of sorts. There's a large amount of Russian people in Crimea. Um, it's not entirely bloodless, but it's at least quick, is my understanding.
yeah. There's
Things,
not a lot that could have been done about it. Because
yeah,
kind of like, well, this is ours now.
yeah, that's it. What is what is weird is that is it, how do you pronounce it? Is it Zelensky?
Zelensky. Yep.
Zelensky. He came to power with a huge, like he was voted in again massively, but he came under one of his campaign promises was peace, and yet somehow during his reign, not his reign, somehow through that Russia for some reason decided that he wasn't wasn't going to stick to his guns, and there just seems to be a breakdown. Like Zelensky has now has said on multiple occasions that he doesn't trust President Putin to honor any agreement that they make, which kind of makes peace accords like if neither side trusts each other at all, there's no kind of way for a peace accord to be found.
I mean, I
Um,
understand when dealing with Putin, I understand the anxiety given how paranoid Putin is. If you can't trust him, there's never going to be that peace
yeah, that's it.
because it's built on respect, and Putin is constantly older.
I what what I do find interesting, or what I find kind of ridiculous, is that the two sides are at this stalemate at the beginning of the war. Sorry, after Crimea, it's 8 years, and then Russia invades Ukraine, and you, I don't know about you, but I remember hearing so many ridiculous stories about like all the Russian tanks breaking down, or them
Yeah,
running out of petrol,
yeah.
or I basically hear about the initial invasion being a pretty much a disaster,
Complete flop.
complete flop, and yet after an embarrassment like that, the war's still going on. And then
Yeah.
months later, the Russians have taken more ground, and then they've taken more ground, and then there's this, that, and the other, and then we're we're sending all of our supplies to Ukraine, and we're offering Ukrainians like special, because they're fleeing. Well, to be fair, many refugees are fleeing war zones, but because of the media attention on this one, and because I don't know, because of the strength of the narrative that it's just Russian expansionism, and it is that to a point, but it's also the policies and stuff that have been put in place on them. Again, I don't think it's a clear cut thing one way or the other, but I don't think the actually, you know what? That's another question. Do you feel the no? That's going off top. Right. Okay. I'll bring back a question in a second. Okay. So, what really surprises me is that the war is still ongoing, and that
You know, I'm
you
going to
don't
get on my
hear anything
soapbox a little
about it
bit.
now. Yeah. By all
But
means,
I'm going
please
to get on
do.
my
What?
soapbox a little bit because people quite often look at these skirmishes and they go, why a war? Like you look at a fight in the playground, right? Basically, you punch him, he punches you, it hurts, you go, ow, that really, and that's the end, right? Like a war is like a big fight in a playground, right? You'd expect. So you drop a few bombs, they drop a few bombs, you shoot a few people, and then somebody goes, ow, that really hurts, please stop. And that's the end of it. Apart from the fact that the longer a war goes on for, the more money it makes. Is more time that war goes on for, more arms are needed, more vehicles are more bombs are needed, the more bullets are needed, etc., etc. And it is a massive money-making enterprise. So when you know that there are literally governments around the world that are funded by organizations that make money from war, they're going to want wars to as long a period as possible in order to maximize that profit margin, maximize funding that they get. That's the really sickening thing about war that most people just overlook when considering why is a war going on for so long? Because it makes a lot of people a lot of money. That's why.
But it makes a lot of. I'd say more people die
But
than people who are made rich in war. Like I realize there might
honestly,
be enough, and I realize a lot of money has been sent to Ukraine.
yeah, absolutely. Honestly,
But
though,
like,
that's irrelevant
mm,
to the people who make the money.
mm,
There are 8 billion people on this, and the people that make the money from war are a very, very, very small handful more money than all of those lives are worth. And that's not me saying I don't care. Me saying that's their attitude. Clarify. Do not
no,
want to be
that's it.
misquoted.
Okay, but like, fine. What I don't understand is fine. So you talk about like the industrial what's it called?
Military
The
industrial
industrial
industrial military complex. Is
yeah, the
that it?
industrial military complex, yeah, making money from this conflict. But it's the industrial military complex of other countries.
Yeah.
Like
It's not
how
countries. It's not countries. It's
sorry, of
companies.
corporate of
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how but okay, but Russia okay, so Russia's a powerful nature, but I don't think is it in where are they top 10? You know what? I'm just going to type in top 10 GDPR. No, that's not okay. But no, it's gross annual. It's not GDPR.
Or, uh, capita. According to the Russia
Okay, so
sits 47th.
yeah, and
List of
total wealth, Russia's 18th.
um,
Okay, so
uh,
how?
capita.
Okay, so considering that, and considering that, oh, Russia isn't Nazi Germany, but I'm going on the. It's the last big. No, okay, it's the last massive conflict between two large-scale factions um within Western Europe. I realize it's Eastern Europe, and I realize a lot of other things have gone on, but from my own ignorant mind, comparing it to World War II, that war, in that war, Hitler built up the German war machine and made the country incredibly industrial and warlike, and yet still that war machine would have collapsed without helps of certain banks back in 1943,
Yeah.
4 years after it started. What I'm wondering is, since since Russia is, sorry, what was it GDPR wise? Was it
47th.
47th? 47th, and yet despite its huge landmass, is 18th in the total wealth. How are these two countries, like, because companies make money, yeah,
Yeah.
but the governments themselves don't.
No, they spend money.
They spend money. And I realize that we've sent money to Ukraine. We've all sent money to Ukraine in England. But how are both sides still going at this point? Considering that it's not a worldwide conflict, like you can.
In order for countries to become classed as neutral, they have to provide equal support to both sides of the war.
Hmm, okay. All right. Well, it frustrates me that it's still going on, and that with like what prompted me to choose this as a topic, and looking at the background of this topic, was first off my own ignorance, second off that I hadn't heard much about it in the news, and third off, I chose this topic during the most recent peace talks a couple of weeks ago at this point, when I was hoping that the war was coming to an end and we could do a nice overview of it.
Was that during the time when Trump effectively verbally face and said, "You're gonna fall over if I walk away"?
No, it was like short. But it was a couple of weeks after that. So it was similar time. I don't think Trump necessarily was involved. It was Zelensky and Putin possibly going to the table to talk about peace. And there was supposed to be a ceasefire over 3 days. Both sides have reported that the other has broken that ceasefire, dozens upon dozens of times. So it looks like the whole thing was a bit of a farce. But like when I heard peace talks were happening, literally, um, my heart kind of raised. Like, so although don't. mm, I don't necessarily see the Ukraine war as solely Russian expansion. What's your views on it? Like, do you see it? How much do you think, from the research that you've done into Russians' narrative of them being backed into a corner and wanting to demilitarize Ukraine, how much do you feel the West is responsible? How much do you feel the Russia is responsible? And do you think there's an end in sight? What do
Well,
you
I
think, Ed?
didn't know until searching that America played cards that way. Because I can't help but think that there is a power like America building bases, other people right on your threatened, still threatened, wars, acrimony, corruption, um, would mean cogs would start turning action. Though I don't agree with the invasion of Ukraine, I can understand why it happened, why it has come about, both from a historical element, the fact that it like people continue to get hung up on historical ties, and claim ownership things that because they've like the fact that they were visitors to that nation. I think the provocation was there. Why the action came. Gone on long enough.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think Russian list, Russian army. Um, there's never. I mean, I'm a personal advocate for armies to be abolished because you only need an
Uh,
army because somebody else. Yeah,
Demilitarization.
you only need an army because somebody else has an army, and this is the 21st century. For Christ's sake, please just sit down and talk through problems. And even if you don't agree, compromise. Find a means to get past it. Because shouldn't be worthy of
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. And like, to be fair, although I can understand people who have respect for uh, for military backgrounds, military traditions, military pride, but that should be secondary to human life. Like, absolutely. Like, it just you can also argue about the needs for certain for the ability to fight, but at the same time, there's got to be peaceable ways of dealing with situations, and I don't think anyone can take endlessly, you know, without realizing that they're doing something wrong. Like, I don't believe that all people are necessarily inherently good, but I also don't think that anybody is pure evil, you
No,
know,
no,
or
and you know what, right? If Russia can go home, and I can all got that mate. Not even that mate. They're just someone who hangs around with you. They're there, and they're annoying as hell, and stupid thing. Question what?
yeah,
And if somebody were to start on that person, still defend them, because it might be a dick. They're yours, and like, do you look after one of you? And get to the point where like you accept the fact that people are different, and you don't not always going to understand them, and you're on with them, but you are going to respect the fact that they are their own entity. Nation, their historical world. Get past.
mm.
No, I don't know. Maybe definitely think
No,
conflict
buddy, it
is
makes
better
sense.
settled with words than.
Well, it's easy thing to get behind. Do you think that how long do you think that this particular conflict will continue going on for? Do you think we've got, do you think it's months, years?
I think there are a
Is
few
it
more
like,
surprises in.
yeah, okay. All right. Well, um, thank you for listening, everybody. I've gone through a fair amount uh material. I realize this one's been a little bit more haphazard, but it's hopefully you've gotten a basic build up or the basic timeline towards the invasion, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and will if the war ends when we're still doing this podcast, I'm very much hoping it does. We'll definitely cover this again. Yeah, Nick, thank you very much for your time and for your
Thank you
chats, and we'll end it here for there.
to everybody that has listened, and take care. Bye bye.